Hello, everyone. Welcome to this next session of Connect More. This is a really exciting one today by Gary Burnett at Loughborough University, and he's going to take us through the hologram lecturer, and that's the ways in which Loughborough University have been using hologram displays to engage students. I'm Kelly, I'm your chair for this session. Just a few points to make. There is a chat pane, so for general conversation, please post there. If you want to introduce yourself, then that would be brilliant. It's lovely to know who's in the room with us. There's also a question and answer panel as well. We'll have some time for questions at the end, so please post your questions in that panel. The more questions, the merrier. I think there will be a lot today. It looks like a really exciting session. If you need closed captions, then there is a button at the bottom of your screen in order to be able to access those captions there. But without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Gary. Thanks, Gary.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kelly. So I'm Gary. I'm at Loughborough University. I'm sure you find this interesting. There's lots of this is very sort of different to, I suppose, to what is happening in a lot of other places. This is part of sort of a university initiative to develop what are known as DigiLabs. There are three DigiLabs. Two are now live. One will come on sort of online later in the year. These are sort of purpose-built spaces for doing sort of innovative stuff in our teaching, in our pedagogy, and sort of helping students sort of develop the next level of digital skills for their futures. And part of that is holograms. There's lots of other stuff, VR headsets, motion capture, AI, robotics, etc. But the hologram stuff is particularly innovative. So just a little bit about me. So I'm a sort of human factors, human computer interaction type person, and especially since the last 5 years or so, I've just been using virtual reality more and more in my teaching, and that's become a research thing. All sorts of issues about students and lecturers as avatars, what type of virtual worlds become relevant, how you deal with sort of issues with headsets, all sorts of stuff. And the underlying research question for me in all of this is how can we implement immersive technologies to transform the student learning experience? And you get a sense of the hologram thing here from me in the real world, and me as a hologram sort of side by side with each other. And yeah, we'll talk a lot more about that going forward. So today I'm going to start by talking more broadly about extended reality. So that's virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and why this is a really positive thing, because holograms sort of emerge from that. There are certain limitations in what you can do with extended reality, and that provides potential in many ways. And there's certain use cases associated with holograms in education, and obviously my focus, particularly higher education. We've been piloting this over the last year or so with students, and we have various feedback. So I'm going to give you some results of the sort of the research side of this, which will also be presented in a couple of weeks' time by myself in Chicago at the Immersive Learning Research Network. So this is all very much sort of cutting edge research. This is sort of moving towards business as usual for us now, as we started to do sort of certain uses of holograms in beyond sort of research studies, and I want to sort of talk a bit more about just a sort of a thing we did just a couple of weeks ago with a lecturer in Finland who was sort of beamed into the lecture theatre in Loughborough, and not just what the students thought there, but what that lecturer thought about the experience too, and some early guidelines, sort of conclusions, recommendations, etc. Okay, so let's just step back a little bit to extended reality. So VR, MR, AR, etc. There's various things, the technology has just developed so much, particularly since the pandemic, the big companies very much involved in this. There's a whole thing about the skills that we need to prepare our students, for their futures, new forms of digital literacy. We have various demands on physical spaces on our campuses. We have obviously issues with climate change, sort of yeah, taking all your students off to the other side of the planet for a field trip is obviously has all sorts of implications. Um, and it's definitely true that the sort of the generation of students that are coming to our universities are different every year in terms of their expectations on the role of technology in their learning experience. And there's a whole sort of sense of sort of global learning here. Now, in terms of what this sort of technology means, access is really important in certain contexts. So just talking in terms of students putting on headsets and being able to access high quality education from anywhere in the world potentially. Engagement always comes up. This is very, very engaging. It's very easy to put a smile on the face of your students through this technology. And it can be really flexible. You've got control over the pixels. You can create, all sorts of different learning experiences that are tailored around individual needs. From a learning theory perspective, a lot of this often comes down to the experience, putting people into an experience that's very much relevant to what they need to learn about. Okay, I know we're learning about volcanoes. Let's get inside a volcano. We're sort of learning about, as we did with some geography students recently, we're learning about what it might mean to be a student on a campus in a different part of the world. Then let's go there in VR. So this sort of experience is important. It can be very, very social, especially when you have students all as crazy avatars, all sort of having, sort of engaging experiences in the world. It actually affords a whole set of different sort of social interactions as well, mainly positive, but sometimes negative. And then there's the whole thing about the context. So you can be very much in the context that's relevant to the learning outcomes. Okay. Now, if I want to get into a bit of theory in here, there's lots of different theories, but this is the one I like most. And the reason why is it sort of got this whole thing, yeah, okay, knowledge. We want students to have, more knowledge, a variety of different knowledge. And we start maybe with the tech and what the tech affords. So we have immersion and we have a control, we have fidelity. But really, at the end of the day, the most important thing is the affordances. What is this? What's different here? And it's down to the subjective illusion that I'm somewhere else, that I'm interacting with people that aren't actually there, and carrying out tasks that I'm not really doing in the real world. So this sort of illusion is very, very powerful. Um, and the other aspect is agency. I'm able to do things that might be unsafe, might be impossible, might be counterproductive, might be really expensive to do in the real world. So the agency the technology affords is very powerful. So others have sort of articulated this much better than I than I am, I think. And Jeremy Bailenson over in Stanford has puts forward this DICE framework. So the best use cases for extended reality are those where the activity in the real world would be dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, or expensive. He added another one of rare, which it doesn't work so well with DICE then. But these are all really powerful. And I think this is always important if you're thinking, okay, we're going to use, VR, mixed reality, augmented reality, etc., and possibly holograms. What are the sort of the most powerful use cases where we might extend or enhance student learning outcomes? And we've been, we've been doing this a lot through our DigiLabs. And I'm just going to talk about the sort of use of sort of VR and mixed reality that's just happened in our DigiLabs through my group since Christmas. So just in the last 4 or 5 months or so. So hopefully this video will work. It's just a couple of minutes long. I'll just talk through the use cases as I go through it. Right at the top of sort of Bloom's taxonomy here in getting into creative skills, getting students to actually build virtual environments in virtual reality, which is really powerful. So like, a future car showroom for personalizing your vehicle. Well, as I mentioned before, geography students, so they're all there, but this is like in the lovely world, and they're exploring different parts of the world and talking about what it might be to, in this case, to be a student there. Human biology students, this mixed reality, so they can see all these different cancer cells floating around, which they're interacting with. And now they're on a sort of 360 of, quiz, basically. So they're seeing the cells, they're answering questions, and they're basically on a race to get out of the human body. Now we're floating around on a whodunit, trying to understand the different cell structures. This is in engineering, so we're all about sort of safety. We can't take our students onto construction sites, but we can in VR. They can start exploring some of the hazards that have been. This is our virtual sports stadium, the 20,000-seater stadium. What's it like to explore this stadium when you're colorblind? The walking and the shooting another is a really powerful use case. Somebody I can't work out how to buy a hot dog. Sand. With like mushy bananas. Another one. So this is like a cataract. And the last one here is doing fantastical things with equipment, with all these students putting on headsets, doing teams, they're going to find their way out of the maze. I mean, VR is possible. So like a really emotional, really sort of bonding experience between students that might need to work together in their sort of in their studies, in their coursework. Okay. Right. So I've given a lovely positive view there. And this is my lead into stuff with holograms. So yes, headsets have all sorts of real positives, but there's some real sort of issues in here. So I won't go through all of those, but these all do come up in our experiences that we have to think about very carefully. But the ones that I'm particularly want to take forward in terms of the arguments for holograms is that some people will always feel sick with VR, with headsets, with the current technology. And we can provide desktop experiences, but that's only going, that doesn't provide the potential of immersion. So this is it's always an issue with with equity of access. There's usability issues. It's really hard to get students far enough up the learning curve to be focused on what on you on your on the what you want them to learn about rather than what does this button do. And so we at the moment it's pretty resource intensive for us to really help them in a lot of this. And there's some equity in access. There's only so many headsets. We can only have so many people in together. And so this is sort of provides an argument for maybe providing the virtual experience, sort of bringing it into a classroom, into the lecture theatre, and that doesn't, that sort of takes out a lot of these sorts of issues. It doesn't provide all the benefits of VR for sure, but it certainly provides some of them. And this is really just sort of, me talking about sort of issues to do with, current technology with hand controllers. Our students take time to become capable of learning with the technology. They need to become competent with it. For them to become competent with it, they need exposure and then training. And this all takes time, or we have to sort of do quite a bit of that for them. So this, right, gets me to holograms. Right, okay. So I think it was important to have this sort of background on this. Now, there are certain use cases. So we're working with a company called Proto, and there are other companies that sort of are developing this type of technology. It's not a true hologram, but it certainly provides the illusion of a of a hologram, and that can be a 3D object, but it can be a person. Um, our most obvious use case in here, picked up right from the beginning, was the remote speaker, the guest speaker. We don't have to pay for them to come from the other side of the planet. We don't have to worry, the CO2 of their flights, the time, etc. We can sort of beam them into the lecture theatre. And this is a powerful use case because access for students to guest speakers from industry or sort of academics from other parts of the world is really powerful for enhancing their learning. But there's also the really interesting stuff of starting to bring students in to generate content, to show themselves, often with their digital content, and to create, a sort of for degree shows, for open days, etc., for sort of highlighting students and digital. There's other stuff as well. We're starting to explore sort of the use of the technology, particularly with recordings, for doing like case studies or sort of, showing scenarios with an embodied sort of human there within them. And of course, there's the whole thing of AI avatars as well. If you start creating AI versions, for instance, of famous historical figures, and you can go up and have a conversation with with someone famous that's relevant to your learning, and then have a discussion with the students afterwards about how authentic they felt that was. And maybe you have two or three different versions based on different assumptions, and you have discussions there. So the AI thing is also very powerful. So the major benefits is access to people. There are sustainability arguments, and there are certainly creativity arguments. And I'm going to just say a bit about the creativity because we've only really started exploring this just with a few students at the moment. The first one is a student. Well, I'll let the students introduce themselves. This is sort of the recordings rather than in the box, in the hologram box. But yeah, you'll get an idea of it.
Hello, my name's Emily. I'm a final year fine art student from Northern Ireland, and I'm here to show off my 3D digital artifacts, like this little guy. He's made on Blender, and I'm inspired by things like Egyptology, Irish mythology, and sci-fi. My favourite sci-fi book of all time is Solaris by Stanislaw Lem, and these sculptures reflect that. Bye!
So that is then, when presented in the box, is then can be at a degree show, can be at open day, can be sort of for presentation type sessions, and you could imagine a sequence of students all walking in, showing something, and then walking out again. And it could you could do that live. But if you want to start linking it with digital content, then it's going to like to be a recording. So this is some 3D content.
Hi, I'm Jade. I'm a final year textiles innovation and design student here at Loughborough University, and this final semester I've been lucky enough to be working in collaboration with Dr. Gary Burnett, who is a doctor of social VR. So for this final semester we've both been working towards creating virtual 3D sculptures of letters to create an immersive experience. Because I wanted to share how it feels to have ADHD as a female, because females are very undiagnosed in ADHD.
I love this whole thing of just sort of the students performing here and sort of bringing the sort of nuances of their character into this representation. Okay, so what have we been doing with holograms? The first time we got the opportunity to start doing sort of direct sort of contact with students was last summer. And Vicky Locke and I, Vicky's a professor in the business school. We started off by having us give some lectures to our own students, just a small number of invited students, so we could get a bit of initial feedback. So effectively, this is Vicky, this is me as a hologram, and this is the studio setup. So this is the sort of the high-end setup that that's needed for the highest quality presentation of holograms. I'm going to talk about a lower fidelity perspective a bit later, which is much more practical for when you have remote speakers. But here for this content, you've got Vicky here, but then Vicky there. So yeah, the two of us were just somewhere completely different on campus. And we were interacting with our students. So if you see it in here, particularly talking about me on the left, I want to say a bit about why it's important. Very, very common for this to happen quite quickly. Not surprising. And then see Vicky on this side.
The more modern agile planning tools.
So you're using sort of clicker to go through the
This kind of
slides,
summary-based
and basically looking straight out to the students. This camera here allows us to be able to see them, and they don't necessarily realise that, and for us to hear them as well through a microphone. Okay, so we did this with this initial set of students. I can't remember how many there were, about 15 of them. So not too many in the first instance. We asked them various questions that relate to this concept of social presence. Remember I said about the sort of illusion? Here it's the illusion of whether you sort of believe that person's in the room with you. So, these sorts of questions. The hologram speaker was in the room with me. So, very much towards the sort of agree, strongly agree. And yeah, I think this is quite an interesting one. The hologram speaker appeared to be sentient, conscious, and alive to me. So to me, that's effectively saying not AI. And they see this as a real human here, and a sort of push towards the future of higher education. But this was a sort of very sort of specific group of interested students. There's a whole set of other stuff. So we asked students questions about to what extent, how does the holograms compare to in-person teaching with a real person in the lecture theatre there, and essentially their answers are around the same as in person. Okay, but if you ask the same question but now compare it with video conferencing, it's way much better. Okay, so their satisfaction is much more, much higher, engagement, sort of the sense that there's sort of less distraction, sort of, and their sense of learning that's coming from this. Now, obviously, this is all subjective. We were also interested about the whole thing of authority figure. So, did they feel like they might be more likely to sort of exhibit sort of negative or even possibly positive behaviors? So most of this is still around, for comparing with in person, is around sort of close to the same as in person. Apart from they seemed less likely to want to leave early, so they felt like they needed to be on time and not sort of just wander out. And again, this might be just because of the nature of the study, and that there's a small group, and it wouldn't feel that necessarily that same pressure. But again, if you compare this same thing with like a video conferencing session, then yeah, they'll be much more likely to eat food and drink and not pay attention and not do what the speaker asked me to do when it's a video conferencing teaching session. So it's clearly much closer to in person than it is to video conferencing, effectively, as an experience. Now, in terms of the sorts of comments that students made, there was loads of really, really interesting ones. There's this stuff about that they felt the person was there, and that they seemed very engaging, and that they were aware of me and were making eye contact. I'll come back to this because this is quite an interesting one about eye contact. It's novel, and so it will be exciting new sort of for quite some time. I feel the hologram caught my eyes. This came up several times. I felt excited about it. Oh, we could focus on what the speaker said. You soon picked up that the sound quality was really good. They weren't expecting that level of sound quality and clarity of voice. And they were sort of, they obviously felt there were going to be some tech problems, and it just wasn't there. Now there were negative stuff as well. So distraction came up. Even the distraction wasn't necessarily in terms of the ratings wasn't that high, but it certainly came up in some of the comments. So I kept looking at the hologram. I was sort of felt like it was a technology interacting with me. Some people did pick up some issues of tech. At one point, yeah, just because of something that I did, I moved the screen and then they could sort of see a bit more into the world that I was in. It's a pretty bright screen, which is also an issue. Our setup in that particular room, it sort of wasn't really a lecture space. It was a seminar space, and so they got sort of their attention was sort of split between the screens on the side and the hologram in the middle. So it's sort of the hologram really needed to be right next to the screen, the slot where the projection screen. And interaction came up. So when we did it first time, we didn't really do Q&A. We sort of kept it one direction just to keep it safe. Since then, we have got into the whole Q&A back and forth. And that's, yeah, I think this becomes interesting. And the last point, which came up with a couple of students, the lecturer seemed very focused on me, which was quite weird, and they couldn't articulate why. And really, this is sort of if you treat this like being a TV presenter and look down the barrel of the lens, every single student thinks you're staring at them. And it's a really, really interesting sort of issue. If you naturally sort of move your eyes around from side to side, this is not such an issue, but you do need to be really careful about how you sort of engage with the camera. This is one of our recommendations for speakers generally. Okay, we surprised them with a test at the end. We did want to see whether or not they actually were paying attention. It wasn't part of the curriculum. It was just a sort of, a couple of extra little 15-minute sort of interesting topics they've of general appeal. And we asked them a set of questions, and there were 5 questions, and generally they percentage of correct answers was pretty high on the questions. In terms of the individual students, most students got 4 or 5 of the questions right. There's one student that may well not have been paying very much attention. So I had 12 students. I couldn't remember how many. So this, there was a sense that they were engaged with this lecture. They weren't just sort of staring at the hologram, thinking, how are they doing this? Now, there's a whole other thing about the lecturer's perspective here, because you probably pick up from that image I showed of the studio setup. And this is Vicky and mine our sort of initial reflection that I didn't feel like I was in the room with the students. Same for Vicky. It was quite difficult to read the room. You have this lack of agency, so I can't move around the room. I'm sort of tied to a particular spot. And I couldn't, point to specific content. We're using a clicker for going through slides, but it's quite difficult to directly. I know when I was doing mine, I was sort of trying to remember that for them the slides were sort of over there in relation to me. So I might go, yes, as be seen on this slide. So but obviously I can't actually see that. What was quite so there was those sorts of negative stuff. But certainly I found it quite empowering because I could start to do other stuff. So I could magically bring in props to sort of heighten because students don't know what's in my world. And I could just sort of wander off and get things, and they're wondering what's he going to bring in next. See it on here. Wandered off, there you go. I got a chair. I was teaching the students about sort of fit in cars. So sort of ergonomics, anthropometry, and basically see all the cameras, the phones all start popping up again. Crazy Gary's like sitting in a chair pretending he's in a car, talking about different sort of seating positions.
Position, and you're going to be much more over here, so the sort of the joint angles will sort of change relatively because of the...
Right, okay, so in terms of conclusions from the pilot work, before I just sort of wrap up. So yeah, students can be very engaged. They appear to be learning. Distraction is a possibility. Distraction is something we have to think about, particularly with in the initial use. It's clearly much closer to an in-person lecture than a video conference session. There's clearly that perception the lecturer is co-present. Interactivity is hard. A lot more tech is required when you need to start doing interactivity really, and do it really well and not start to break the illusion in here. And I'll talk about that in terms of what we've just done in the last few weeks shortly. The lecturer can still have authority over the class. That first one, we just had researchers. And so Vicky and I were still the ones who were in control. And there was a whole interesting thing about whether or not we should be waiting for the students or whether or not we get announced and then we come in. If it's a proper guest speaker, you would have the module convener and they would be there and they would announce the guest speaker. But some situations that might not necessarily be the case. And we need to consider, where we locate our hologram technology in relation to where the students are and where in relation to the slides. Yeah, the students, I didn't mention that some students in our setup there, if they're off on the side, the hologram illusion doesn't work as well. And it's much better if they're a bit of a distance and sort of looking sort of more directly at the hologram rather than off to the side. So this is the most recent thing that we did. It's on the 1st of May, so just a couple of weeks ago. This is a lecturer from Finland being sort of announced by the module convener. We've got about 40 students here that are in the class. There's a lot of tech stuff that's going on in the background because they were playing around with different cameras. But you'll get a good sense of it here.
I would like to very warmly welcome our visiting lecturer today, who is a long-term colleague I've known for many years. Her name is Johanna Hautala. She is an associate professor at the University of Vaasa in Finland.
Thank you, Heike, for introducing me. This is my first ever appearance as a hologram for an audience, so I'm really also myself looking forward how this feels for me, but also how you experience lecturing like this. I have marked with stars those places or those centers where economic geographers have been studying a lot this development. So you can see Silicon Valley, Montreal in Canada.
So now we're doing Q&A. So you've got a student given a mic.
Do you think the next level from this is where the lecturer is AI, where they're in a hologram form, they're sort of AI, and what's the effect of this, do you think, in sharing knowledge?
Oh my God, what a question.
University is very much the forefront here.
Okay, it was just me sort of wrapping it up at the end. I think it's quite funny. The very first question a student asks is what happens if you then become AI in the future? Anyway, so this is different. So this is not a studio setup this time. So we're now sort of properly exploring the remote speaker who effectively is doesn't have access to a sort of high quality studio setup, and effectively this is all happening through an app on their here on their iPad. They've got the slides are here, but they decided that they wanted their slides to be nice and big for them to look at as well, and they were going to struggle to be able to see their slides here. So so essentially that is the camera. So when they look at that, they're looking directly into the room. Okay, but of course you're going, well, how can they see the room? And this setup that the lecturer had at this point was not as developed as we wanted it to be. So effectively, that's their audience view, this tiny little screen here. So they really had very little view of what's going on in the room. They could hear people very clearly when they were asking the questions, as you could tell, and respond to it, great. But in terms of seeing into the room, reading the room visually, that just was not there. And I think the next generation is where this becomes a big screen, so that they can properly see and go, yes, you with a red t-shirt, that's a great question, that type of thing. Okay, we also surveyed the students here, just a few quick things. what's interesting here, compared with a speaker in the room, how engaged were you in the teaching session given by the hologram speaker? The push is actually to about the same level of engagement, stroke more engaged. So they actually did feel quite engaged with this session with the hologram speaker. But they still found it difficult to interact. So this is towards more difficult. So the interaction with the hologram speaker is the hardest part of this to really sort of properly get right. And it's something we'll sort of be exploring more and more as we go forward. Okay, this is just a few comments. So yeah, the fact they picked up on the fact they could engage with someone they wouldn't have normally been able to engage with. They still felt the Q&A was cool. The physicality of that person there with the hand gestures was really good. And I thought this was quite a nice quote. It didn't feel like a Zoom call substitute of a lecture, but rather just a different form of lecture. But there were some negative stuff in here. What I thought was quite interesting with this set of students is they sort of empathized with the hologram speaker. It would be good if they could move around. There was a sense that they were struggling to on their end to communicate with us. And so yeah, I think there was some sort of interesting sort of empathy issues here. And that's me. Yes, there you go. I think I got there about enough time for questions. So thank you very much.
Okay. I was just trying to unmute myself. That was really interesting. Thank you, Gary. I absolutely loved that presentation. We do have a couple of questions come in, which we should have time to answer. If anyone else wants to post questions, then feel free. The Q&A panel's at the bottom. So the first question is from Coral. Are the VR experiences shown created in-house or are they third party?
Okay, so for the VR stuff, so these are created in-house. So it was part of the reason for appointing me at Loughborough in the first place as a sort of professor of digital creativity. So we at the moment have our own social VR platform that's based on open source code that we are sort of creating experiences for students with. So there's a certain amount of top-down sort of stuff with the DigiLabs and the sort of infrastructure, particularly with hardware and sort of networking. But in terms of the software and the creation, that's largely coming through me and my team. And we're sort of working to empower the digital learning technologists with the university, sort of upskill them so that they can do this, because there's only so much that I can do with my postdocs and tech tutors. There's a real. I gave a talk at the university's teaching and learning conference 2 weeks ago about this, about scaling, because it's I think we could scale through this sort of approach, and it certainly allows us to create much more bespoke experiences rather than relying on generic stuff from companies or having to pay companies lots of money to develop stuff for you. It's really quite good to work with a generic platform and then build the experiences, use the 3D modeling software, use your sort of skills with this type of software to develop.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Next question is from Dominic. Is there a licensing fee associated with the proto devices, or are they and the capture equipment purchased on a one-off basis?
Yeah, okay, you're asking the wrong person. I was just the person who said, I think we should invest in this technology. When I started, I said, if you want to really do something that's different, that's really going to sort of go beyond the what's happening in other universities, then invest in this technology. I have a feeling that it's a combination of those. So there was a sort of a purchase of the technology, and then there's some form of sort of license for the software that allows us to upload the content, basically.
Okay. Caroline asks, really enjoyed listening and learning about all of this. Me too. Just wondered, re XR, are there a suite similar or same that can be accessed by users who are living with a visual impairment?
Okay. So yeah, the accessibility issues here are interesting. And I think for a lot of this, it's obviously it's down to the nature of your impairment. because there's so many different forms of visual impairment. And for most groups, you can certainly you can make adaptations within the headsets, within the software, to allow people with particular sort of visual impairments to still be very much part of the experience. Yeah, I think if I want to sort of turn it round, something that we have done quite some really interesting stuff with is the whole empathy stuff about teaching students what it might be like to have a visual impairment. So we've sort of turned it round there to okay, yeah, you've got to challenge your scenario, you've got to cross the road, you've got to buy some food in a shop, but now you're doing it with cataracts, now you're doing it with glaucoma, and so that, you know, that's that whole thing. But yeah, we have been quite conscious about what we can do based on our understanding of the student in advance of a session.
It's interesting, isn't it? I've got a visually impaired son, and I thought he's got a headset, and I thought he wouldn't be able to use it, but he gets on fine with it. So I
Yeah.
think it's due to the
They have
nature
various
of
accessibility features built in, and you can do stuff in the development of your experience to sort of to make things a lot easier as well. So you can, for instance, set up a situation where, you know, they can be sort of teleport themselves immediately to where they need to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're in the right place.
Conscious of time, got 4 minutes, got a couple more questions. This came up in my mind as well. Is this technology similar to the Avatars virtual concert experience?
And people keep asking me this, and I think I really need to go. I have
It's
read a bit
brilliant.
about sort of the abattoirs, isn't it, or avatars, and a lot of this is smoke and mirrors, the sort of the illusion of a hologram. I think a certain amount of it is the same sort of technology. I know they do quite a lot of stuff because they have the big screens. So the big screens, people get very influenced by those big screens. So they can see on the stage and see, you know, ABBA there performing, but they're then also very influenced by what they see on the big screens, which essentially is then a recording. And so it's but it makes it seem like it's, you know, it's a camera perspective of what's on there, but it's not, it's a recording. Yeah, it's I think I think the basic answer is, I think some of it is the same, and then there will be other things that they use to create the illusion of a hologram.
You should go and see it. You can compare then, Gary. That was a
Yeah,
really
yeah,
good
no,
question. Thanks, guys.
yeah. I need to sort of persuade my wife to come. She's not a big ABBA fan, so
Put it
I'll
down
just
as
go on my
research.
own. I don't know. Find some
Okay,
friends.
Sarah asks, re the VR content, what training or software would you suggest a learning techs do? I'm a learning technologist, but have no idea where to start.
Yeah, so I've been doing this in terms of, you know, interacting with our sort of enhanced learning team about how they can start to do this, and start to build these experiences. I think the approach that we're taking so far is you start with just providing some awareness. So you need to start with a basic awareness of what's possible, and because some things are relatively quite easy to set up. So a good example would be just a 360 image or a 360 video. Okay, you can record 360 images, videos. You can get various ones online, and it's a very simple thing to just get those onto a headset. So in terms of development, that's the sort of simplest thing. Then there's the move to certain platforms that allow you to create more interactivity, sort of more agency, and I think my general recommendation would be to get a headset and just start to explore educational sort of softwares that are out there. There is a problem there because of IT and what might be approved or not approved ultimately, because there's a whole other thing about how this technology is managed across the university. So funny enough, you know, you got companies like Meta, the university is not going to be, clearly not going to engage with students having to set up Meta accounts in order to then access content. So you end up getting into a whole thing about managing those headsets so that they are device level. So it doesn't matter who puts this headset on, they are anonymous, and that they can access the content that has been approved and is put out to all the headsets.
I have to stop us there because we've got to 10:30. We had one
Oh,
more
right. Oh,
question
wow. Okay.
from
Yep.
Steve, but I'm sure Steve can email you if he would like to speak further. That was really fascinating. I actually loved that. Thank you, Gary. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to all the audience out there. So the session's going to end really soon. You'll be taken back out into the main event lobby, and enjoy the rest of Connect More, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Thanks, Kelly. See you then. Bye.